Good afternoon to everyone that has tuned into this event with the title, Can the New CAP Make Space for Nature? Bringing Nature Back to Agricultural Land. My name is David Scallon. I am the Secretary General of FACE, which is the European Federation for Hunting and Conservation. And we have a very good lineup today, and I will shortly pass you over to our moderator for this event, who is Luc Bass, who is Director of the IUCN Europe office. One announcement we need to make, unfortunately, due to an urgent meeting, we have a cancellation from Miss Maria Neukel. She sends her sincere apologies, but she had to attend a meeting where she is active on a file. We're delighted to have a good audience on board, and we hope you enjoy this event. And everyone is aware, and those of you that have tuned in, this topic, the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, is an essential topic for the EU institutions at the moment. And I can see Martin Lavacek has joined the meeting. You're very welcome. At this point, I will hand over to our moderator, Luc Bass, Director of IUCN Europe. So the floor is yours, and perhaps you provide a brief introduction to yourself.
Yeah, thanks, David, and thanks for the invitation to moderate this session, which is very dear to us and very important, especially as we have to have this discussion with those that are really in the field, this being hunters and the farmers and of course our NGO members of IUCN, and I hope there will be some government officials in the audience, which is of course the other part of IUCN, our intergovernmental character. For us, dialogue is in our DNA, so again, great to do this. I look forward to hear very great presentations. We have a great setup with politicians and with scientists, so we have a nice policy science nexus here. Two MEPs. We'll hear from Herbert Dorfman from the EPP and from Martin Lavacek from Renew Europe, both very great experts in their political work in the parliament. And we'll hear from two scientists, Sebastian Lackner and Dieter Kömmler from the different universities, and I will introduce them a bit more in detail later. So dialogue is important. We need to see a real reform. This is not about whether the CAP will deliver, it is how the CAP will deliver, because it has to deliver for nature and for biodiversity as well as it has for farmers. But we need to see a reform in which that has been done in a fair way, I think. And we think at IUCN, we cannot talk about a European Green Deal when there is not a strong reform of that common agriculture policy. It would really ditch the credibility of the European Green Deal if the CAP is not a real green reformed CAP with all the social aspects and needs in there. And then finally, before I'm going to hand over to Martin, which I know is a bit under time pressure, I wanted to say that all these solutions are, of course, political, a policy, a regulatory, a financing element to it, but it's also about practices. And so IUCN has been working on these two reports, one on sustainable practices in agriculture, and another one that came from the global program, which is called Common Ground, which is looking much more at soil biodiversity and the need to take care of that. So it's a very central issue also in the new program of IUCN, and hence, again, I'm happy to be contributing here. And then finally, we have to make sure that these solutions are, and the nature-based solutions that is so much been talked of now in the Green Deal and in many other strategic documents that come with the Green Deal, such as Farm to Fork and the European Biodiversity Strategy. These nature-based solutions have to get done in the right way, and IUCN just released a standard, which I would advise everyone who is dealing with land use and protecting nature, but also a livable farming community to have a careful watch into those. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Martin to give us his first reflections on yes, will this CAP do it, and how should the new CAP do it? So over to you, Martin. Now you should be unmuted. I hope we can hear you now. No? Okay. So while Martin is trying to figure out the mic, which I hope will happen.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear
Martin,
me now?
now we can hear you. So over to you to give your introduction.
Okay, thank you. I can hear you well, but I'm sorry I was struggling with the button for muting this and unmuting the speech. Thank you very much, first of all, inviting me. I also have to apologize I can't stay for entire session, but I didn't want to cancel. Also have to join the meeting that Maria Neuchel is on as well, but I have agreed with my dear colleague Jan Hoytema that he would take over. That's the benefit and beauty of having mutual shadowship than just being alone. So first of all, thank you very much. Thank you also for organizing those events, and straight on the topic because I don't want to strip you of too much time. As you know, all the topics that you care about and are dear to you are also dear to the majority of our group as a Renew. And this is why we try to address the key elements that you tested as well in our proposals. It has taken us several months to put together, and I hope a very good concept. So if you allow me, I would express you what is our concept for the next reform that we have in mind. It has in fact three interconnected pillars that we hope, if done properly, they will support each other and they can multiply the benefits. What kind of benefits we mean? I think we need to start from our vision. We would like to have the next CAP that is both green and viable, and we believe that this combination is absolutely key. And what does it mean? We need, of course, incorporate the ambition that is brought to us now by the Green Deal, cascading down to the farm to fork strategy, to the circular economy strategy, to the biodiversity strategy. But at the same time, we need to make sure that there is a buy-in from the farming community, because farming community by definition is relatively sensitive, or in a positive way, sensitive to policy changes. That means the adaptation here has proven to be important, but we need to have the, I think, we need to have the right framework and also incentives around that. This is why we center in the first pillar our key, the policy around our key element is our so-called enhanced eco schemes. This is a bit of our upgrade on the original proposal of the Commission on the eco schemes, and we believe that this should be a real and genuine element of the first pillar. And if we mean it seriously with the eco schemes in the first pillar, that must go hand in hand with two other things. And first is, of course, financing. So this is why we advocate for a significant transfer of the first pillar money into the eco schemes. In our approved position, we talk about 30 to 40%, because we believe this should be exactly the incentive that farmers would really join those measures. And there is a second element, and this is knowledge and investment. And this is because it will not happen automatically. We need to provide this knowledge transfer about what and how should be done. And if we combine that with a financial incentive, we are quite optimistic that we will have a majority of farmers joining those schemes, and we need this solution at a large scale. I don't talk about more details here. I would explain how do we link it to the second pillar. I think this element of investments and also knowledge transfer and advisory in the second pillar are key for us as multiplicators and also accelerators of this development. If we want farmers to do much more on a large extent of our land in Europe, this is where we centrate on the eco schemes. But first, we need to also help them to get equipped technically, but also get equipped by know-how and knowledge, so mentally. And this is why we are the only group in the parliament, and in fact the only one in the game here who is asking also a ring fencing on investments in the second pillar. But don't take me wrong, we don't talk about investments from the on the ring fencing from the second pillar, but we talk about ring fencing within the envelope of investment. Because you see, if we want to have 30 to 40% on eco schemes in the first pillar out of the budget, we also should have minimum 30% of investments allocated in the second pillar. So not from the second pillar, but from the budget on investments, obligatorily allocated to the what we call green smart investment. So this is that element that should contribute to the technical part of it, and a part, proportional part of the money for technical assistance and advisory should be also linked to the objective of climate and environment. So our common denominator in those three key elements I have mentioned in the first pillar and in the second pillar, the common denominator is the objective that links to the climate and environment. We believe that this combination is key because at the end of the day, we want to have a genuine transformation toward a green economy. And by this, we mean something that is profitable. That means that farmers need to not only adapt and change, but they need to really transfer to a little bit different. And we believe this change is qualitative, not quantitative. And this is a big difference, we believe, from the previous reforms we had in the past. That's why we put also a lot of emphasis on the investment part and also on the advisory and knowledge transfer part of it. So that would be on the concept in general. Allow me to conclude, I think, on one particular topic that I think is quite close to your mind, to my understanding, and this is the non-productive features and let's say those topics that are linked to the GAEC 9 today. Here again, we believe we should not erode the ambition that we have, should not erode the level of ambition we have today, which means that we have some limits in the GAEC 9. That's what we want to keep. But again, if we want to boost it up and go beyond, we believe this should be a space for eco schemes. So what does it mean in real terms? Our proposal is, should you opt for eco schemes and bind yourself for a higher target than what we see currently in GAEC 9, then you can be compensated more for this. But should you opt not for GAEC, should you opt not for an eco scheme, or should the member state does not provide you this option of an eco scheme, that you cannot escape the system, you can still remain there. And we will see what will be the final compromise on GAEC 9, but for sure we don't want to go below on the baseline. We believe we should go beyond this baseline and incentivize majority of farmers to join those eco schemes that would go significantly beyond the baseline. Of course, this topic is also linked to the non-productive land. This will be, of course, a sensitive issue from other aspects, not only the productive one. And here there is a broader complex of discussion that I would not preempt. We don't have detailed position on this one, but I think we would have to also address this. It's an integral part of Farm to Fork as well now, on the biodiversity strategy now as well. So this is for the beginning from my side. I can still spend a few minutes, so if I have missed something, I apologize, and I can still complement based on your potential questions. Thank you so much again for inviting me, and I hope it was useful what I shared with you.
Thank you, Martin. This was a very concise but also very complete overview of your position, of your group's position. I want to tell people on this webinar that they can actually put a question in the box. So you have a few minutes to do that before Martin leaves. I haven't seen any yet, so I think I'm gonna pop one to Martin. And hopefully I can see one come from the audience. And as I understood, you're leaving us, Martin, at 4:20 to be in time for the next meeting. Is that correct? I hear in your intervention a lot of quite some emphasis on the eco schemes, and I think it is with good purpose and to make sure that this pillar 1 also gets better used. Of course, there is this challenge with the voluntarity of this, especially towards the farmer. So it's clear that in your explanation, you said you have to make this attractive. So the voluntary decision will be in favor, and many farmers will want to do it. But how would you try to strike a balance into the one on the eco schemes, and on the other hand, making sure this conditionality is actually strong enough, and ultimately we have a clear pathway to this 10% of agricultural land that is in this diversity landscape, because that 10% is the ultimate goal, at least from the Green Deal perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my personal opinion, but this is not relevant because this will not be the final solution, because I don't see this happening in the council, neither here in the house, in the parliament, would be that we have obligatory eco scheme also for farmers. But this is out of question. We see now that likely the solution will be that the eco schemes would be mandatory for the member states, but voluntary for the farmers. So for me, also someone who has in the past programmed concrete measures in practice, you have only one option. You need to simply cut what you have today to a significant extent, so that the loss and the potential benefit for doing more is in the right balance. And that's why absolutely key element for us is not just the structure of the enhanced eco schemes, but also the amount that would be spent for that. This is why we propose 30 to 40% as a minimum. We know it is difficult it might be difficult for some other political groups. So let's see where we will end up. But doing all this significant change in the CAP with a concrete purpose, and that at the end of the day, doing it for 10 or 15% of resources, it does not make sense. It would simply not work in practice from my perspective. On the link to conditionality, if you study our proposal a little bit more in detail, because quite often people were afraid that if you move to the eco schemes, you automatically reduce the ambition on the conditionality. And some even were afraid of greenwashing and whatsoever. If you study our proposal in detail, we offer, for the sake of a simplicity, but also for the practical purpose of an uptake. Let's don't dream in colors. If we don't provide measures that farmers understand and can do, and at the same time are beneficial for the environment in a way that is digestible, we will have a difficulty. And I think we want to succeed and meet the targets soon. So for the sake of simplicity, and avoiding some double check, it is true that some of the GAECs, like I mentioned 9, we believe they should remain in the conditionality to the extent that we see the baseline today, but we should go much beyond and offer compensation for it. There was another concern linked to but we should keep the baseline. This is what I want to highlight. In our proposal, you cannot escape from the system. What can also not happen, and if you look in detail in our proposal, that was often the concern as well, that maybe you opt for one eco scheme and you cash in everything back. No, this life is not that simple. Okay, you will have a portfolio eco schemes from the member state, and they have to define clearly what kind of compensation is here and there. So it's not like that you get out of 3 GAECs, then you apply for one eco scheme that is compatible with one former GAEC, and you cash in back everything you had before. No, that would be I think a trick, and this is not the purpose. So this is also part of our proposal, that is having those guarantees there, because for us the baseline is not touchable. It is untouchable, and also it is not compensatable anymore in that extent as it is today. So eco schemes must go clearly beyond that.
Okay, thanks, Martin. This is very clear, and the one sentence I remember here is, "Don't, you cannot escape the system." So we now have to hope that the system is the good system, and it functions well both for farmers and for nature, because ultimately farmers depend on nature. I just have to make that comment here in case we would have forgotten it. I know you have to leave. Good luck in the meetings and in the upcoming weeks towards an ambitious position for all of the Parliament, which I'm sure Herbert will now also share with us in intervention. And to see that I think we will have to push our member states and the council a little bit from the Parliament in the tradition of the role of the Parliament at large. So I hope you find a good agreement in the deliberations that come. Thanks, Martin. And I'm going to hand over now to Herbert Dorfman.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Martin.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your time. Okay. Well, Herbert, I'm going to hand over to you. I think most people will know you. You're with the EPP group, very active in the Agro Committee, originally from Italy, if I understand. I guess it's from the north, given your name. But over to you and to share your views on the way forward and on an ambitious position from the Parliament on the CAP and the reform. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation. Good afternoon to everybody. It's really a pleasure for me being here and tell you something about what we are doing as an EPP group, or what is our proposals. So as you're aware, we should vote in the Parliament on the 3 regulations or proposals by the end of October. So in the last plenary October, in the second plenary of October. So we have more or less 1 month to prepare or to do the final work on these files. We are already working. I've been working for 2 years on it. In my role as an EPP coordinator, it's clear that also the EPP supports the approach of a stronger and more precise green architecture within the common agricultural policy. But as Martin said before, it's clear that we need to find a balance between different interests. One is are the demands of the society and of the consumers. This is also expressed partly in the Farm to Fork strategy. Another one is the high level of ambition for the protection of the climate and the environment, but then there are also the interests of the farmers. The common agricultural policy remains an important policy for the farmers themselves and also for the income of the farmers. We should never forget this, that the common agricultural policy helps the farmers to go on their farms, and it remains essentially that if we want the farming going on, that this activity is an economically sustainable. So a farm needs to be not only sustainable in the environmental way, but also economically sustainable. And we need to find in our policy, let's say, a balance between these different demands. We in the EPP think that the green architecture, or if we compare it to the proposals we have on the table, we would like to connect better the first with the second pillar. We think that the environmental budget should be a global budget in the first and in the second pillar. also because we have completely different starting points in the European Union. We have member states which invested in the last years and in the last decades heavily in the second pillar and achieved a lot. And this sometimes we tend to forget that we have also a lot of success also in the environment sector, especially with the agro-environmental measures in the second pillar, maybe much more than with the greening approach we introduced 5 years ago or 6 years ago in the first pillar. And we have other member states which, due to the how the second pillar is organized, which is depends heavily on national and also regional decisions. We have member states which did not do a lot and are not doing a lot, and we should take into account this, and we should find or define a global, let's say, investment overall the common agricultural policy for environment. In our proposal, in our paper we adopted in my group 2 weeks ago, we mentioned that this could be 30% of the whole expenditure in the first and then the second pillar. And then it's clear that the common agricultural policy has a crucial role if it comes to biodiversity, to landscape, to environmental protections, and therefore it's fundamental that the agricultural practices go in this direction. And you are perfectly aware that the proposal behind the table provides more flexibility for the member states, especially in the first pillar, to implement environmental and climate schemes we will have if this proposal flies. And I think at the end we will have an agreement which is fundamentally based on the Hogan proposal. It introduces the strategic planning, which is fundamentally planning at the member states level. And we have to decide at the European level how ambitious we are. So what is the minimum baseline, let's say, which the member states need to respect in order to get their strategic plans approved. And it's clear that as Martin said before, and I'm aware for you in this meeting today is especially important, the GAECs 9 and 10, which are addressing land management and the protection and quality of biodiversity, especially GAEC number 9. I very much agree with, and this is also the proposal of my political group, to combine, if it comes to GAEC number 9, the existing baseline with new ambition. So our fear is if we put the GAEC number 9 only into the eco schemes, which are mandatory for the member states, but not for the single farm, we could have also single farms which go, which do not respect anymore what we already have. So which do not respect anymore the greening obligations we introduced in the last year. So also we think that we should maintain in the conditionality what we had for now in the greening measures, so at least 5% of non-productive features, and we should go beyond this. And in the paper of my political group, we said at least 8% in the strategic planning of the whole agricultural land within the eco scheme. So a combination of conditionality, which saves the actual baseline, and a new ambition which is achieved within the eco schemes. And this would guarantee that we have a higher ambition as we have it now at the member state level, but we avoid that single farms fall beyond what they are already doing now. And then this, I think, as I understood before what Martin said, we go very much in one line. I would like to conclude here just saying one word, which is on another topic, which is maybe a bit out of this very specific debate, but I think it's important. We have, and this is already in this decision of the head of state and in the council and in the July council, a decision that 40% of the expenditure for the common agriculture policy needs to be used to fight climate change. This must achieve. I think it's extremely important that we take into account also we have today a lot of land in Europe which is not really used for agriculture. So if we speak about common agricultural policy, is not covered by the common agricultural policy, but can be used to increase biodiversity and can be used to fight against climate change. We have a lot of land which is abundant, which is without plants, without trees, exposed to erosion, and exposed to loss of organic matter. And we really, I think we really have to think how to deal with this land, which is thousands and thousands of hectares in Europe and increases, especially in less favored areas. I think we should go in our consideration a bit beyond the farming land and look at the whole picture, so the whole surface of our member states, look where we have today possibilities to increase biodiversity, improving the condition of land which is in a degraded situation because of let's say the fact that farmers abandon fundamentally this land. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much again for the invitation, and I'm very curious to hear now our experts and scientists about the topic.
Thanks, Herbert. Thanks, and a lot of interesting ideas. Of course, one that always comes back to me as a question, but by now we're starting to get some questions from the audience. We see already, and everybody's noticed, I guess, in that communication from the German EU presidency, beginning of September, where there was this idea or this proposal for, and potentially has to do with this transition, but in the first 2 years to make these direct these ecosystems funds still available for the direct payments, and likely without any condition, and percentages have been thrown around, but one sees, and I think some read, cannot speak for ourselves, but they read some already early attempts to put the ambition down on the eco schemes. What's the feeling in your group? This is a political sensitive issue, of course. The German presidency being very, very clear about it, and I think many have noticed it. So, and I think many hope that the Parliament will help assure this overall ambition. And I agree with you, it's beyond the agricultural land. Of course, we cannot distract from what has to happen there. But yes, the restoration agenda is another big issue that we have to tackle together with the farmers, indeed. Yeah, restoration of degraded land, as you said earlier. But just very quickly, and then we go to our scientists to give us their views on what's needed. And so this was actually also a question from the audience. So I picked already at least one from Jure Kus, which unfortunately I cannot tell which organization it is. But so, well, how do you reflect on that statement from the German presidency?
Well, I'm not responsible for the position of the presidency. It's the presidency who needs to who defines its own. It will be in the dialogue to have a debate on this. I can only assure you. I mean, if I see some ideas of some member states on eco schemes, this will never have a majority in the parliament. So I see some ideas coming from some member states which fundamentally think that we should try to avoid eco schemes. This is not the intention of the Parliament. I would say my political group, which is for clear, has very much in or pays high attention to the interest of the farmers themselves. Also, we are telling to our farmers that we need to work for high ambition on biodiversity, on climate change. We proposed a 30% goal, and I think this is a figure which can be achieved without creating damage to the agricultural production in Europe and the farmers themselves. But I know that in the presidency, especially some members that come in completely different opinions. We will see in the dialogue afterwards.
Of course, no, you cannot. You're absolutely not responsible for that statement. It's just interesting to hear first the reaction and a view, and so that's very clear and actually hopeful. So let me end with that hopeful note with this question. There's some other questions coming in. I'll pick them up later when we go in the Q&A. But now I'd like to hand over to our scientists. And as I understand, you will be doing a combined presentation. Dr. Sebastian Lackner, Professor of Agriculture Economics at the Faculty of Agriculture and Environmental Sciences at the University of Rostock in Germany, will kick off, and then followed by Dieter Kömmler, the Senior Research Associate at the Leibniz Institute of Freshwater Ecology and Inland Fisheries in Germany. So from the German presidency to the German scientists, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation to this really interesting webinar. I'm happy to provide an overview on some of the results we've been working on. First of all, I would need to share the screen. I guess this is something the moderator has to do, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, wonderful, that works. Now I hope you can see the slides. Okay, again, how to gain back space for nature. What are the potentials and the barriers we are perceiving from a scientific perspective? So I will start to give a short introduction into the topic of biodiversity decline and looking back on the last financial period. So what can we draw from that? What can we learn in the view of space for nature? Then Dieter will hand over and talk a little bit about the relation of hunting populations, hunting results, and agricultural structure and the CAP, which fit pretty well into the topic here. And I will finally end up with number 4, an outline. So the topic of biodiversity decline is, at least from a German perspective, quite in the media since 2017, when an article in Science magazine appeared, "Where have all the insects gone?" And this is based on a very long-term collection of biomass of insects, finding a large decline by 78% in 24 years. Now, this study has been in the media pretty much, and it detailed follow-up publication in PLOS ONE ended. I put the reference below the slide. However, there are also criticisms on that because, yeah, some of the parts of the data sets are weak. And that's the interesting thing. It's the publication itself got a lot of interest. However, there are even more publications pointing exactly into the direction with, of course, different numbers. However, if you look on that, for instance, which was published last year in October by a team of the TU München, you find, at least from the biomass, a similar dimension, a little bit less. If you look on individuals, you find the same trend. You find the same trend on single species numbers. You could also look into the birds counts. You find the same thing. So we can conclude that the decline of biodiversity is well documented. So it's nothing we really can debate about. It's more the questions, what are the drivers? So what are influencing factors where we can let's say, change the trend. If you look also into the literature, I brought a second study, which is a meta-study looking on the drivers. And what you can find is, of course, agriculture is among others. That's important. It's not the only driver. We find also worrying developments in other areas like the urban areas. However, if we look on the landscape, agriculture is an important driver. And one important first takeaway message is that agricultural structures and habitat structures, so all the things which are surrounding, let's say, the core production area, like hedges, like buffer strips, so everything which makes up a diverse landscapes are an important driver and the most important driver. Pollution is also important, so we need to care about fertilizers and pesticides. However, it's only number 2, and we find other influencing factors. So we always have to have a bundle. We see action on different levels, so it's not the one screw you can drive. It's a multiple complex problem. And of course, it's not only farmers, so it's nothing about blaming farmers. It's about how to help them, how to support them. And in that sense, it's a societal challenge, which is an important take-home message from the National Academy of Science in Germany. We wrote a study in 2018. However, you will see an update in a few weeks in October where we have a big study on that. So, can be the contribution of the CAP. If we look on the actual CAP, we find, and that is the good part of the message, of course, is that we have a new set of objectives for this actual reform. And 3 of those 9 objectives are really related to environment in general, and 1 is even specifically on landscape and biodiversity. However, looking at the budget contributions, we see that still income policies make the major part. 60% of the spendings are just on income objectives, whereas if we just focus on climate change and biodiversity and natural resources, and we just take the serious part of greening, and that's important. We do not go beyond the 20%. If we take the ineffective part, of course, of greening, then we end up with 36%. And that is especially sensible if we look on those figures, how much to second pillar and eco schemes. If I hear proposals of 30% eco scheme and second pillar, we fall behind the last financial period where we have 36. So that is also already something where we need to take care of. Now we heard second pillar agri-environmental schemes are important for biodiversity. This is something which I would strongly support. However, what we've not seen is a substantial progress in spending shares. This is the share of the agri-environmental schemes from 2000 to 2018 within the whole EU. And then you can see in single member states, of course, we had a substantial improvement. We have some member states which are very successful in their second pillar agri-environmental schemes. However, overall, we are fluctuating between 4 and 6%. So there is no substantial progress in there. And this is the second weak part of the last funding period. I already mentioned greening. We evaluated greening in 2017. Many ecologists say, well, the large part, and especially catch crops and nitrogen fixing crops, are not effective for biodiversity. They have no effect on the preservation of endangered species also. So they do not really contribute to the objective of ecological focus area. And then you can separate between effective options and non-effective options. And the majority is not effective. We just have 28% effective on the EU level. In Germany, it's even less. It's about 20 or 19%. So a large part of greening is just water. So fallow land, flowering strips, and landscape element. And by the way, those are the elements I mentioned in the introductory part, so they are really effective. We also have a problem in the priorities. If we look on the 3 options we have, greening, agro-environmental scheme, Natura 2000s, we see spending per area. The largest bulk of money goes into the least effective part. Then we have still the agro-environmental scheme with roughly 250 euros per hectare, which is okay, but the most targeted part, Natura 2000 payments, life fund, this is, let's say, gets the least attention. So a lot of challenges. Now my colleague Dieter Kömmler will take over and speak a little bit about the relation of hunting and deer, and he will take over, and I will still manage the slides. So Dieter, you need to mention when I shall go on.
Thanks a lot, Sebastian. Just before Dieter goes into the second part, which I think is actually, yeah, another element to all of this. You gave us a very sobering assessment, actually, of the previous period, which of course is where we have to draw lessons from. It is following also the European Court of Auditors response to an assessment. So can you give us 1 or 2 key elements that you think really need to be strong in the outcome of the CAP, of this new CAP, to make sure that we avoid the mistakes that you have just been describing? And if that's maybe if I'm overrunning you with this question, maybe you can park them for now, and then maybe at the end of Dieter's presentation come back to it. Or if you want to answer, we're happy to listen, of course. But I think we need to have a little bit of immediate reflection to what you just presented, because it's really very powerful, actually, how it is presented as well.
Yeah, I will. Dieter will first of all present some of his results, and then I will come back. I will join back with a number of slides on the actual situation. So what to think about the council conclusion of September, and what we, let's say, what would really help if we think about the final decision in the parliament and in the council. So what I would recommend from my part. But first of all, let's give Dieter the floor, I guess, right?
You were just heating up. Okay, great.
yeah.
Over to you, Dieter.
Dieter?
Now you should be able to hear me. Yes?
That's great. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, great. You can't see me very well, but at least you can hear me. Okay, thanks also for the invitation, and I will talk a bit about a paper that Sebastian and I have worked on over the last few years, actually. We wanted to study how agriculture, and particularly agri-environmental programs and wildlife, are related. First of all, a little bit from the conceptual side, and second, then also have some empirical implementation. First of all, the question is, what is the effect, and what might drive the effect of an AEP on wildlife? And of course, the drivers, there might be many, but first of all, it might be geographical characteristics of a region, vegetation, climate. Then, importantly for us, farmer behavior. So how does the farmer actually implement a given program? And finally, the habitat requirements of a given species. We used red deer and roe deer in Austria as our model species. And you can see here that they have been, at least by the harvest numbers, thriving over the last 30 years or so. The harvests have increased in Austria compared to other species. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so of course there's a lot of research from the ecological side. How does a given agro-environmental measure affect a species? But there's actually less that studies how do farmers actually adopt agro-environmental programs, and then will this induce a behavioral change within the farmer? And understanding this adoption mechanism will actually be key to see if a farmer, first of all, adopts it, and then whether it will change the production practices, which might lead to a habitat change and then also a change in the species abundance. Next slide, please. Okay, so a key driver of the adoption by farmers will, of course, be the opportunity costs. So the foregone revenue by implementing a certain programs. And we will basically have three types of farmers. We have those with low opportunity costs, which are mostly probably marginal farmers. They don't have any cost of implementation because they probably use very low fertilizer or pesticides levels anyway, and therefore only gain from the subsidy that is provided within a voluntary AEP. Then we have medium opportunity cost farmer, which would be this medium intensity. They have some additional costs or foregone revenues by implementing certain measures, but the subsidy will still be greater and outweigh these additional costs. And finally, we have high opportunity cost farmers, which are the most intensive farmers. They will simply not adopt any AEPs, and there will be no change. So importantly, these types 1 and 2 will adopt an AEP, but there will only be a habitat or landscape change with the medium opportunity cost farmers, because they are the only ones that actually have to change their production behavior. While for the first one, if anything, the subsidy might induce a conservation effect in terms of, okay, the farming practices that have been practiced before will just continue, and the farmer might not run out of business. So adoption does not necessarily mean an environmental improvement, and that the empirical effects on wildlife are largely unclear. Next slide, please. So what we did was a regression type analysis, regressing using actually a latent class model, regressing the harvest density of red deer and roe deer on agro-environmental payments in Austria, using Austria as an example. And what we see quite clear is we do find some effects, first of all, also of the farm premium, so first pillar payments, but also of the second pillar payment, what's seen here as ÖPUL payment, the Austrian agro-environmental program. But importantly, only in 1 out of 3 classes of districts. So we do find some effect, but not everywhere. And we then further go on and study which regions might actually be the most promising for a given species. And of course, depending on the species, the regions where we have an effect of the AEP will be different. Second, we also added some other control variables such as tree density and unproductive land into our regression, and we see that, for example, the unproductive land has a positive effect on roe deer and red deer. Harvest densities, whereas with the tree density, it's a bit different, and you can see here that, of course, these 2 species have different habitat requirements. Next slide, please.
Dieter, I'm going to very quickly intervene just for the sake of time. And okay. I know that Sebastian is also coming back. So if you could both try to wrap up by 5, then we have at least a decent time for discussion. And I think it means speeding up if I know that you have 19 slides. So a kind request to do it.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Basically, that's all I wanted to say. Anyway, the key finding is the effects depend not only just on how much money you spend, but also where you spend it, and regionalization and targeting of EPPs might be actually a strong imperative for improving the effectiveness and efficiency of spending in the future. And now back to you, Sebastian. Thanks.
Thank you. And we thought that this result might still be interesting because it shows the necessity of let's say, targeting measures in the first and second pillar. And what the first concluding slide is a little bit, how can we actually use the given opportunities? And I listed conditionality, especially here in view of GAEC 9 and the eco schemes and second pillar. And I mean, the nice thing of conditionality, the potential is, of course, a simple implementation, and you secure a minimum share of landscape features. And that is, of course, important. However, you have the necessity to combine it with other measures. Otherwise, farmers will, let's say, I put it react. However, you could also say evade measures. So doing the least ambition you can, which is in a way understandable. It's more a policy problem of doing the right thing. And within conditionality, still you don't have a target. So you cannot make sure that it fits what you specifically need in view of, let's say, hunting species, landscape, whatever, biodiversity. Eco scheme is a little bit the joker in the reform, because we actually still don't know what is happening. It seems to be easy money, but finally we need to see the percentages which are secured for this instrument. Simple yearly eco schemes can help as a door opener. However, you have the problem if you want to establish landscape features or buffer strips or things like that, you have duration of measures. You need to do that for a number of years. You might have fluctuating uptake, which is also something you won't like. And you need to coordinate with the specific biodiversity measures in the second pillar, which in greening, it never really worked. There are just a few cases where you can show that it really worked. So this coordination is a large challenge. ACM, from my perspective, to be really short on that, I think it's an well-established working program, at least largely. However, we can still improve the focus on specific targets. And on the other hand, we have acceptance problems. So we still have a lot of bureaucracy, and this remains the challenge. Now let's come still a few words on the council proposal. I mean, if you look on the details, we've written a number of papers. We've published one study in Science. We made an informal fitness check. We've published a paper on greening. We've published an action needed paper where we, let's say, developed some constructive proposals. And if you look on that council proposal, you can still think we are not even repeating the mistakes. We go beyond. It's even worse than 2030. The watering down effects are substantial. And this is a danger we described from the very first moment, that if you come up with a lot of flexibility and then you water down ambition, it's getting even worse than in the last reform. So this is something I was, let's say, not completely surprised, but the degree is already outstanding. So I won't go into all the details. However, it contradicts the findings of most of the paper I've written. And I'm not prescriptive in what policy needs to do. And I understand that there are interests of farmers. So we need to, let's say, get the farmers on board and motivate them. That is completely clear. However, I do not see any element of that. And I just see watering down of ambition and making it even worse than in the last reform. So what can we say constructively? I mean, a diverse agricultural landscape is a precondition of production. We need landscapes, and it will support biodiversity. It's a decisive factor, and it has also value added for consumers and citizens. So they perceive it as positive. Minimum landscape share will support biodiversity and also hunting species. So it's a useful tool for that. It's part of the biodiversity strategy. So we have it from the Commission given, and it has to be, of course, then accompanied by other measures. Finally, we need more strategies to convince farmers that it's useful to do something for biodiversity, like targeting of the measures. We need advisory services and monitoring. We need attractive and innovative formats like collective action and result-based ACM, top-up payments to make agro-environmental schemes more viable, and more financial resources, of course. And we need to take it from direct payments. There is no other way I really see. So it's more a question on percentages and how to, let's say, signal and do political leadership. And this leadership, unfortunately, saying that as a German, I would like to see more of that from the presidency. So we have some papers. So if you are interested, I'm happy to share. And thanks for inviting us. Thanks for listening. And I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Thanks so much, Sebastian and Dieter. This is very comprehensive. Thanks for that deep dive as well. I think it is necessary to look at some of the details. You showed us some success stories, which is where I think the hope is. But then we saw some frightening numbers from Dieter, and unfortunately from ICN we can only add to that crisis, because if you look at the red list that ICN produces, it's just devastating, the numbers that we see, and very much on those species that are so dependent on diverse agricultural landscapes as well. So I won't give you, maybe I should give you one number, and that's the most frightening, is the one on trees. Over half of 58% of Europe's endemic trees are at risk of extinction, and about a fifth of the amphibians and reptiles are endangered. So, and it can go on and on and on. So we all know it's serious, and even not for the species, it's also for the ecosystems, and ultimately a healthy agriculture will depend on those ecosystems. That case is made. It's unfortunate to see what is happening to this architecture. We talk about this green architecture, and I think in theory, the Hogan proposal, as it's been called still, although at this moment maybe people don't want to call it the Hogan proposal anymore, but has had some opportunities there, with big risks on flexibility, of course, for the member states. And then, of course, when we see the council going in this direction in September, which hopefully can be still corrected, it's of course of heavy concern. And I think it's maybe most appropriate to what has been presented. And before I take some questions, because we have quite some time left, which is great, I'd like to ask Herbert to maybe reflect on what has just been said. What are the risks, and what do you think within the Parliament and in the discussions in the Parliament? And of course, we cannot have the discussions here, and that's not the intention, because we have the formal fora to do so. But still, from this presentation and from what we've heard so far, what are, you think, the biggest sticking points, and where can the Parliament play its role on the top line to try to convince also Council to be more ambitious? Quite a long question, but I think it's just introducing your reflection on what you've just heard.
Sorry, I think now you can hear me. Well, in the Parliament, it does not exist the Parliament. In the Parliament, there are many different opinions and from many different political groups. And I mean, it's clear that these opinions go from one extreme to the other. And the challenge we have is in this moment is to find the majority in the Parliament. And this is not that easy, because it's quite a complicated composition of the Parliament. I think especially what been said by Sebastian at the end, it's an important topic. How much, if we want a higher ambition, we need to have more money for this ambition. We need to reward the farmers. And as we know that we will not have more money from the CAP in general, it's clear that this more money needs to come from the direct payment so from the basis income scheme, and that is the real challenge, I think. And I'm aware that in the council there is high pressure especially from some member states to say we want as much as possible in the basic income scheme, and then we see a bit for the rest. And I think in the parliament there is more, or the opinions say no, we are aware that we need to, we still need a basic income scheme, and I'm maybe this is not the position of my group, I'm aware of this, but I myself say, and I think this is the biggest, I would not say mistake, I say weakness of the Hogan proposal, that the Hogan proposal does not at all indicate a way out on a medium and long term from the direct payment scheme, because this would be the real challenge, and I can't see this at the moment. But if we want to maintain the common agricultural policy as a whole attractive and acceptable for not only for the farmers but also for the society in the long term, we need to come out from a simple payment per hectare. And I think this idea is strong in the parliament to say, okay, so to go in this direction, we need to take part of this money and put it on the eco scheme system in order to have funding available to convince farmers to do more, and to make this also attractive for farmers. And then at the end there's a debate how much and what are the measures. But I think on this I would say we are a bit more progressive than the council. Let me say.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I made the comment earlier that there is hope that that of course the parliament has a bit really more of a European reflex than, and where the council we see the national reflex, and of course all the pressure that is also on the politicians nationally. You talk about rewarding. I think that's exactly the word that is the key word here. It needs to be a strong rewarding system. With the money that is there, it has to be for a big part from the pillar one. That's also clear. I mean, there's all the voices point in that direction. And ultimately, I think the main challenge is to really explain how this is attractive for the farmers, and on the long term for sure, because that's what's needed, but also on the shorter term. And therefore these what we can call payment for ecosystem services, which ultimately it actually is, and that is a public good, and therefore the public money should be used to do that, and to make sure that this is actually in the benefit for the farmers. And that's what I hear you say, and it's good to hear that these per hectare payments are just an archaic way of proceeding with public funding in this respect, because it's not actually benefiting not even the farmer on the midterm and the long term. So really interesting reflections. I'm now going to give, maybe David, you wanted to maybe come in from your perspective. Ultimately, it's also your event. And maybe you have either a question or a comment to what you've just heard. And then I'm going to really start reading out the questions to the panelists and then offering opportunity to respond to them.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's very interesting, and particular thank you to Herbert Dorfman for a very interesting presentation. I mean, yeah, our position on this within FACE is really coming at it from an angle where we've seen a major loss of biodiversity in Europe's farmland and a collapse of small game populations like red partridge and brown hare. And that work by Sebastian was interesting, looking at red deer and roe deer. I mean, what we're discussing really is this point in the EU biodiversity strategy, this 10% target of agricultural area under high diversity landscape features. Okay, from our perspective, maintaining the baseline is essential, but you know, we definitely think we need more to meet this level of ambition. So we have set out our view in a minimum of 7% within GAEC 9. Maybe a couple of very quick points. This term non-productive features, I find it very interesting. I mean, personally, I don't like it. I think if we look at these areas as being more production support areas, I mean, they'll provide a wide range of ecosystem services, regulatory, cultural, etc. I think it's how we look at this, and maybe the term semi-natural vegetation is better in this context. I think also in this discussion about this 10% target, I think we also need to look carefully at the definition of agricultural area. That's also under discussion. So we feel this should be quite broad, so it includes trees, hedgerows, woody vegetation, some wetland areas. So these can be eligible components of the agricultural area. And the same applies with the definition of permanent grassland, which has improved in recent years, but definitely we need an inclusive definition of permanent grassland. We've seen lots of problems, particularly in areas where you have extensive livestock farming and in high nature value farming areas, where farmers have been unsure and agricultural ministries have been unsure about what's eligible and what's ineligible. And it's led to a whole raft of confusion and problems. And the result being farmers are unsure, so they clear large areas of productive habitat. The point about targeting is very important. And we see that agri-environmental schemes, the point was mentioned, there's a nice paper, it was work in Northern Ireland looking at mammals and agri-environmental schemes. The title is Hare Heaven or Pest Paradise. And the result from these agri-environmental schemes was actually a greater abundance of rabbits and foxes rather than hares, which that was supposed to do. But also the point about results-based, we saw it in, I think it was your presentation, Sebastian. We see a lot of positive results, and our members, hunters, are engaged in some very progressive results-based and community-based agri-environmental schemes that are working for ground nesting birds, where you need a combination of habitat management and predator management. But very, very well noted, this point on targeting. And also, I think there needs to be greater clarity. GAEC number 9 and this fixed percentage under conditionality, particularly for livestock farmers. For extensive livestock farmers and high nature value farmers, you may not need a major change. They may be meeting that requirement already, that percentage. But of course, it's a different discussion for a more intensive dairy farmer and how you deal with that with buffer strips, for example, and how you accommodate the loss in production. Maybe a little bit more discussion is needed there. But yeah, maybe Luke, back to you for some questions from the audience.
No, thanks, David. I think it's really important that we had you and your voice here, and also the voice of the hunters, and of course they're a very important contribution to conservation in those areas as well, and their dependency, of course, on the high biodiversity and abundance. There is a very long questions in the chat, in the question box, which I think will be better to be answered also in more detail, and it's impossible to do it in the little time we have. There's one from Peter Palhajas, which I hope the organizers and where we can help, we will do or answer to, but it's very, very long and it looks interesting, but I just can't read it out. It's too long. I want to highlight one question. It's from farmer, or from a farmer, I think, and I prefer to do that rather than give my focus on conservation, which would be a bit obvious. It's really about making the living, and I think Herbert mentioned it before, and of course having a proper reward and a system that is attractive and making sure it happens. And I'll read the question in a second, but I do think it has to do with the bigger picture that we also have to keep in mind. And I think the Green Deal, where we expect a cap to be fitting into a Green Deal, the Green Deal itself should also maybe reflect on how it can support agriculture also. So it's not maybe only the cap. So the cap needs to be corrected. I think I will ask everybody to reflect to the current green architecture, and if it actually the architecture is strong enough, and that seems difficult to change at this moment. It's more about percentages and about conditionality and about how much from pillar 1 and pillar 2. So the actual architecture seems not anymore under debate. So the question here is, and I'll leave it to the first who wants to answer. The farmers trying to make a living and operating on very small margins. So hence we need a systemic change, which also includes proper pricing of the products for the farmer. That's my quote. So they won't be interested in any extra input unless there's a clear gain. And I think here we are at the definition of gain. And maybe this question I will pop over to Sebastian and to Dieter, how they would actually respond to the farmer, which is Alex Vankovs. So Sebastian, you may want to start.
Yeah, completely. I would completely agree. I mean, and this holds for biodiversity. It might also hold for climate change. If we want farmers to provide public goods, then they need to have a top-up payment beyond the pure costs for, let's say, risk and profit. And this is also because if you want to specialize on these things, you might need to invest, and it needs to be financially attractive. So I would completely agree. Dieter, you want to add?
No, I agree with Sebastian as well. Yeah, absolutely. Of course, with additional payments, you need to be aware that a lot of the payments, as research has shown, does not directly end up with the farmer, but ends up in the end with the landowners. And so, thinking about mechanisms to actually support the farmer and not the landowner is another important issue when thinking about subsidies.
It's a very important point you make there, and I think this opens up for a whole different panel and a whole long debate, and who benefits ultimately from what. Maybe Herbert, you want to come in on this, because I think this is of course also your concern, I'm sure.
Yeah, I agree with, because it's clear that this farmer said, unfortunately, agriculture activity is an activity where the margin of profit is very, very low. It's not an activity where we have extraordinary profits in doing it, unfortunately. And we have on our table the farm to fork strategy, which I think is 90% of farm strategy is not, unfortunately, is much more a farm strategy than a fork strategy. And I'm convinced we need to bring into this whole debate also the consumer, because this higher ambition must be somehow also rewarded, not only by the taxpayer, but also by whom is going to the supermarket. This is another source of money, like put it like this. And we should never forget, if it comes to biodiversity, we have a lot of regions, and I'm coming from the heart of the Alps, so it's one of this region. One of the biggest loss of biodiversity is if the farmer goes away and stops farming, and therefore we need to keep farming also economically sustainable. So keep farming also in difficult areas is also under the perspective of biodiversity, I think, an extremely important challenge.
Yeah, it's another interesting comment you make, because I think it has to do with different aspects of where we have come with nature in Europe. And in some cases, it's true, we have come so far that in places we need to manage nature, otherwise it's difficult. In other places, of course, also in Europe, it's still okay to let nature take over. That's also possible, and it can create high biodiversity. And then, of course, we have active restoration to help degraded land to be more biodiverse and nature rich. So there is many options, I think, and in some cases, yes, it is sad, or even also for nature and biodiversity, if the land is abandoned, but it offers another opportunity for different kinds of restoration, which then ultimately may not be agricultural production, and production of other services, as was said before. It's the production in a broader sense, not just of necessarily of the food, which is bringing us to the other systemic big issue, how much production is actually needed in Europe. And that's another big debate if you look at the big waste percentages in Europe, and so maybe there is opportunity to produce more quality instead of quantity, and so there's a cap should direct into quality production and not so much into quantity production. So these are the bigger things, and this brings me back to, and I'm letting you think in your closing remarks. I will give everybody the opportunity to say something at the end. We have been talking about what is now on the table as a green architecture, but maybe we should end at to say what is key. Is this green architecture, is the architecture good enough, or are we just now discussing the let's say only the windows of the house and how the front will be painted, but the fundamental house is still not in order. So this is a bit of a provocative line. I will take, in honor of the questions in the chat box from participants, a direct question to you, Herbert, and I'll just read it out. Dear Mr. Dorfman, in the EPP position on the cap, it states that the flexibilities of the greening rules shall apply to 8%. Does it mean we allow again options like catch crops, etc., which haven't proven to be efficient to protect biodiversity? It's quite a specific question, and I'll leave you to try to answer, and maybe Dieter and Sebastian, because it is a bit technical, might want to respond as well.
I'm very sorry, but most probably due to my weak connection, I didn't hear anything from flexibility onwards.
I'll try again. Or maybe, did Sebastian and Dieter hear me well? Okay, so I will copy the question in the chat box for you, Herbert, and then I will let Sebastian go first.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Try.
I mean, as I said, we did a survey among roughly 90 ecologists among all parts of Europe, and we asked them what are effective options within greening. And catch crop had we had from not effective -5 to very effective +5, and the median of catch crops was 0. And even negative values. So I don't see, I mean, there are arguments to do catch crops, right? Erosion, whatever. But then call it, we do an erosion policy and catch crops. But here we speak about biodiversity, and I don't really see any value added on this. Dieter, I mean, any comments from you?
Well, just the general comments that the effectiveness is probably in general difficult to measure, especially at a larger scale, right? So,
yeah, but we have, I mean, we have ecologists investigating that even on the field. So we did this survey on the one hand. On the other hand, I know a number of studies confirming that. So it's we do catch crop for maybe for other purposes.
Okay.
Hey, did you catch the question on catch crops?
Yeah, but catch crops are already now under the conditionality. It's not part of the eco-scheme part. So it's two different things. One is proteins, for example, production of protein plants. Another thing is catch crops. So I think it's two different things.
Okay.
Yeah, but in the council there is the proposal to get catch crops back into GAEC 9. So the council is discussing that, bringing back catch crops into greening.
Okay.
I mean, I would prefer
as I told you, unfortunately, I'm not a minister, so I cannot speak for the council. It's up to the council to the ministers to decide.
I agree, and it's not our place and time not actually to go into that, although very exciting. I have quite an exciting question, and because I mean, it has been puzzling me also for some time. And the question is from Robert Canworth. Can the European Commission, and I think he also means all the institutions actually, learn from the new schemes that are being adopted in the UK following Brexit? yeah, one of the things we've seen, and I mean, I will be very blunt about this. This is, for me, this is one of the saddest things ever happened to Europe. So I will be not neutral on this. But the one thing that gave some hope in the UK was that they could get rid of the common agricultural policy and do things fundamentally better. I don't know for sure if that's really happening, but there are some interesting schemes. So is this something that that we can be inspired by? This is the question from Robert Kenwood. It's free to answer, of course, because any Brexit question is difficult to answer. Maybe David want to have a go.
Yeah, as an Irishman, I love Brexit questions. I think we can gain a lot from looking at what they do in the UK, and it's certainly it's very interesting to look at them think outside the box a little bit more. And the point was raised earlier by, I think, all of the speakers about you know, the ability to really deliver for biodiversity with this area-based payment system, and it will be very interesting to see how the CAP evolves in the future, in the medium and long term. I think that's why we need to get this CAP right for biodiversity, because it's a question about you know, having a strong CAP for the future. One point I'll make though is that even within the current framework, there is scope to do some very interesting things, and results-based, community-based agri-environmental schemes under Pillar 2 can really deliver results. And these have been tested now in a few countries, like in Ireland, and there's great support from the local hunters, but also the farmers, and it's making farming easier in sometimes challenging environments. And I think we should look at, and certainly our members are discussing this with the ministries at national level, where there are openings in national rural development plans, to try to be a more creative when it comes to Pillar 2 agri-environmental schemes, to really have them much more targeted and bringing in that group of stakeholders that can help. But yeah, to summarize, yes, there is a lot we can gain from looking at the UK when they're out of the CAP architecture.
David, where are you from?
Northwest Ireland, County Sligo.
Ah, it's Ireland, you're right. Great. Sebastian, I think you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I would also support that view. I mean, it's interesting what is happening in the UK. If we ignore that Brexit is really a very sad thing. In the UK, they had already functioning, or at least partly functioning, schemes for collective action. So farmers put themselves together, coordinate, and do schemes on the landscape level. And I guess it's a very interesting way to go. And that is still the hope that, I mean, the actual signals do not look so bright for the general CAP framework. I'm still hoping for the parliament after Mr. Dorfman. It was still, let's say, you are giving us a little bit of hope. So let's hope that we find some ambition, but still the member states can do a lot with that. And looking at the UK, looking at Switzerland, how they do effective policies might really help, yes.
Yeah, no, okay. Oh, so now I'm not muted, I'm muted, okay. I think, thanks, Sebastian, and this is kind of linking to that overall question I put forward just earlier, and David kind of answered with the opportunities with this architecture and what we can get out of it with the highest ambition possible. And then, of course, looking into a longer term where we actually have to be even more ambitious with reforming this CAP, and what is on the table now, even as a basic structure, is not living up to the needs, at least not the needs in the context of safeguarding climate and nature. But of course, this is a transition and needs to have the farmers on board and in solid negotiation, and of course, finding a middle ground. Although we have been for 20 years or more not doing it right, so hopefully we can get it right now. Dieter, you want to reflect and a little bit in your closing comments, and then I'm going to hand over to David to close the actual webinar for today. And with the last word from Herbert, of course, before that. So Dieter, you want to come in?
Sure, yeah, thanks again for the invitation. Was a very interesting discussion and hearing all these views. I certainly learned a lot, also hearing from the hunters, and yeah, looking forward to next time. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Dieter. And Herbert, some final words from you?
Yeah, I can be very short. I think the challenge is to make these efforts or the proposals for more biodiversity, for more climate change, also an opportunity for farmers, because I think in the long term, it will fly only if we have really the support of the farmers. We see this, as David said before, we have the experience of agro-environmental schemes in the second pillar. We have successful ones, we have less successful ones, but we see that if we create a framework where the farmers see an opportunity, they participate. I'm coming myself from a region where these schemes are extremely important and they really help to maintain the landscape and also the biodiversity in the rural areas. I'm aware that this is a very particular situation, and we have a lot of other realities, agricultural realities in Europe where the situation is completely different. But I think this is the big challenge, to do these efforts together, or try to do it together with the farmers and try to have a positive outcome.
I cannot agree more, Herbert. It has to happen with the farmers because they will ultimately be doing it, and so we have to make sure that the framework is helping them to help nature and biodiversity in Europe. There is, of course, a much bigger picture. There's a very important year that is passing now, unfortunately, through COVID, but 2021 will now become, hopefully, the super year for nature and biodiversity at the global level, in which, of course, ICN is very much involved. And me, as a European director, I want to see, of course, high ambition from Europe. We have a great biodiversity strategy on the table. It's unfortunately still paper. We still have to see what really is going to come out of it, and Parliament and Council will also express themselves, as with Farm to Fork, and then ultimately, of course, with a strong reform of the CAP. And I think in these, and I'm trying to pull it into the international level, if you want to be credible, our Green Deal has to be credible, our national commitments have to be clear, because it cannot only be in superficial general EU rhetoric, but then not seeing it happen at the national level. So if we are serious and if we really want to lead the way I think Europe has been leading on climate change, if we want to do that for nature and biodiversity, we have to act together, do it in a very balanced way, in a convincing way for farmers. Of course, this is attached to the market system and the pricing and the margins, and I think we need to try to get these bolts and nuts corrected as well, so it's not a one single issue. But until further notice, the CAP and its funding is the biggest chunk of the EU budget, and if we can't get it right there, then how can we be credibly speaking about the other parts of the European action and budget? So it's a very big test for Europe. Hopes are high. Honestly, my hope is high, and I hope you will be able to convince your colleagues in the Parliament, in your own group and outside of your group, for a very ambitious way forward. For my part, I want to thank everyone and all the panelists and all the people on the call, and the many questions which I'm sure the organizers have grabbed and will hopefully try to maybe put forward to either Sebastian, Dieter, or Herbert, or our ICN or FACE can answer them in their best way as well. So they're not being lost. Great dynamic. We are only running 4 minutes over, if I'm correct. So I'm now handing over to David to close the session for today, and a big thank you to all. Thanks.
Yeah, a huge thank you to everyone. Herbert Dorfman, thank you very much from EPP. Martin Labacek earlier, thank you very much from Renew. And thank you very much, Sebastian and Dieter, for giving us a very clear overview of CAP in terms of its impacts and where it needs to go. And Luke Bass, thank you very much. You did a very good job moderating this. And yeah, I mean, the main message, I think we all agree, can the new CAP make space for nature? I think we agree, yes, it must. And it's a matter of finding a way to do this. And that's the big discussion now for the institutions. We're all very active in this. And I think it was very helpful to have this dialogue. So on behalf of the European Federation for Hunting and Conservation, thank you very much. And let's keep in touch on this important topic. And thank you to all of the all of those who have been watching from your homes and your offices. Thank you for being with us for this great discussion. Bye-bye.
Bye.